In England 200 years ago, remarkable changes were occurring in the ways in which goods were produced and transported, especially the use of the steam engine, especially the building of a canal network, especially the growth of internal and overseas trade. These events, which transformed England and created the modern world, are known as the Industrial Revolution. The exhibition of the works of industry of all nations, known then and now as the Great Exhibition, was held in London in the summer of 1851, displaying England's industrial skills to an envious world. The exhibition summarized England's achievements in almost a century of industrialization, and, as the organizers stressed, the exhibition, by its independence from government, was also a confirmation of the self-supporting and self-acting principle of laissez-faire. Housed in a building that was itself a unique technical and architectural achievement, Joseph Paxton's Crystal Palace, the exhibition, with its 17,000 items, was on a gigantic scale. No spectacle since the circuses of ancient Rome had attracted so many people. Over 300,000 official catalogs were printed, and the first excursion trains in history transported visitors from all over Britain to swell the total attendance to over 6 million people. The exhibition was truly international, with exhibits from around the world. But while other countries won medals for foodstuffs, raw materials, and handicrafts, England took most of the prizes for industrial products. In textiles, pottery, metal goods, and machinery, the exhibition showed that England was producing on a scale and at qualities and prices that other countries simply could not match. The exhibition symbolized English industrial supremacy and demonstrated to the world the possibilities for material progress that were the direct result of the Industrial Revolution. The aim of this series of films is to increase our understanding of the modern industrial society in which we now live by studying the events which led to the Industrial Revolution and by evaluating its consequences. We will seek to answer 3 questions. First, what was the Industrial Revolution? What distinguished its world from what went before? Second, why did the Industrial Revolution occur where and when it did? In England in the 18th century. Third, what were the consequences of the Industrial Revolution for the people who lived through it? This film deals with the first question. Just what was the Industrial Revolution? And for an answer to that question, we go to Nuffield College at the University of Oxford and to Professor R.M. Hartwell.
The Industrial Revolution was the great discontinuity of modern history. It separated a world of slow or no economic growth from one in which growth was considerable and sustained. It was not a revolution that produced violence and bloodshed as did the French Revolution of the same period. Indeed, it was the almost completely peaceful transformation of an economy and society over a century. Its outstanding characteristic was the increase in the output of goods and services per person. It led within 50 years to the British domination of the world economy that persisted throughout the 19th century. By 1830, Britain was producing 3/4 of Europe's coal, 1/2 of Europe's iron, 1/2 of Europe's cotton, and most of Europe's steam engines. How did this remarkable transformation come about? Who was responsible? It was the work of a small group of outstanding businessmen and inventors, a few hundred in all, and their more numerous imitators. These men pioneered the use of power-driven machinery, and they invented a new form of business organization, the factory. They were also a new type of businessman, the capitalist entrepreneur. As the French historian Paul Montou wrote,
"The manufacturer, being at the same time a capitalist, a works manager, and a merchant, set a new pattern of the complete businessman."
The transformation of particular industries, indeed, began usually with changes brought about by one or two such businessmen. Samuel Smiles, who emphasized the technological abilities of these men, also recognized their revolutionary importance, writing shortly after the Great Exhibition that
"Our engineers may be regarded in some measure as the makers of modern civilization. Are not the men who have made the motive power of the country and immensely increased its productive strength the men above all others who have tended to make the country what it is?"
This could certainly be said about the Derby family, pioneer ironmakers, Telford, builder of roads and canals, Boulton and Watt, makers of steam engines, Arkwright, inventor of cotton spinning machinery, and the master potter, Josiah Wedgwood. The history of the modern iron industry begins here in this very furnace in Coalbrookdale, Shropshire, in the early 18th century, with the successful use by Abraham Darby of coke instead of charcoal as the fuel for smelting iron. Darby had established an ironworks in Bristol in 1699, but he moved here to Coalbrookdale in 1707. At first he used charcoal as a fuel, but soon he developed his method of using coke for the smelting of iron in this furnace, and thus released himself from the problem of transporting large quantities of charcoal from a wide area. The ironworks at Coalbrookdale were managed by 5 generations of Darbys, and the works continued in existence for over 2 centuries. The first 90 years of the firm's history were remarkable for their innovations. The first successful use of coke for the smelting of iron, the substitution of cast iron for brass in the cylinders of the early steam engines, the introduction of cast iron tram rails, later imitated by railways, and the greatest existing monument to the skill and enterprise of the firm, the construction in 1779 of the first cast iron bridge ever built, a bridge which at the time was considered by John Byng, Viscount Torrington, to be one of the wonders of the world. The first Abraham Darby was both inventor and businessman. His 1707 patent for the casting of iron-bellied cooking pots laid the foundations of the family fortune. His iron pots were soon selling in large quantities, displacing the expensive brass and copper pots which had been so valuable that they were often specified in wills. Abraham Darby's kitchenware was cheap, within the pockets of the majority of the population. He was the first businessman of the Industrial Revolution to cater for a mass market. He was the pioneer of the English iron industry, an industry which gradually expanded throughout the 18th century, with production rising rapidly after 1780. The number of blast furnaces increased from about 20 in 1700 to over 80 by 1790. There were 177 in 1805, 372 in 1830, and 655 in 1852. The production of pig iron had been 30,000 tons in 1770. It was 250,000 tons by 1805 and 2 million tons by 1850. The history of modern communications begins with the improvement of roads and waterways and the building of canals. 3 names stand out for their contributions to road improvements: Blind Jack Metcalfe of Yorkshire and 2 Scots, Thomas Telford and John McCadam. Metcalfe stressed the importance of good surveying and good drainage. Macadam devised a system of watertight road surfacing that is still used today. He built his roads up in layers of carefully graded stones, starting with a firm foundation and finishing with gravel that was firmly pounded to make the top surface watertight. Telford came from a Scottish village, was self-educated, began life as a stonemason and raised himself to become the leading civil engineer of his times. In a long working life, he built thousands of miles of roads, hundreds of miles of canals, and hundreds of bridges. He also constructed docks, harbours and breakwaters, and much of his work is still in use today. He was the first president of the Institution of Civil Engineers and was consulted by foreign governments about canals, roads and bridges. He was a pioneer user of iron in construction, in lock gates for canals, in bridges and in aqueducts. For example, in the famous Ponte Casilta aqueduct in Wales. Sir Walter Scott, the novelist, spoke of it as the most impressive work of art he had ever seen. He built a splendid road from London to Holyhead in Wales and 900 miles of new roads in the Scottish Highlands. But perhaps Telford's finest achievement was the Chirk Aqueduct in stone in the valley of the Kerryog near Chirk Castle. The aqueduct consisted of 10 arches of 40 feet span each. The work, when it was built between 1796 and 1801, far exceeded anything of the kind attempted up to that time. If coal was the fuel of the Industrial Revolution and iron its structural material, steam was its power. Steam engine was probably the most important single invention of the Industrial Revolution. The early steam engines, invented by Newcomen and Trevithick, were used almost exclusively for the lifting of water, especially in mines, and they were inefficient in use and expensive to run. All this was changed by the Scottish instrument maker James Watt. Watt's great achievements were first, to invent a separate condenser which increased the efficiency of the engine by reducing its heat loss and at the same time cutting fuel costs. Second, to invent the rotary motion, thus making the steam engine a universal source of power for industry. The simple vertical up and down motion of the earlier engines limited their use for industry. Watt's engine imparted a rotary motion to driving shafts that gave continuous power, and this made it particularly useful in factory production. Watt was primarily an inventor and engineer. He would not have been so successful had he not gone into partnership with Matthew Boulton, who added capital and entrepreneurial skill to Watt's inventive genius. It was Boulton rather than Watt who saw the importance of the rotary motion. As he wrote to Watt in 1781,
"The people in London, Manchester, and Birmingham are steam mill mad. The most likely line of consumption of our engines is the application of them to mills, which is certainly an extensive field."
How right he was. By 1800, there were already 1,000 steam engines in operation in England, with 250 alone in the cotton industry. By 1800, the steam engine was at work in a wide range of industries and in most counties. The age of steam had arrived. James Watt, like so many of the great figures of the Industrial Revolution, came from a humble background and began his career as an instrument maker in the stimulating atmosphere of Glasgow University. Like so many other successful Scots, he moved south of the border to make his fortune in the expanding economy of the Industrial Revolution. Before he died, he could exclaim with pride,
"I have spent a long time in improving the arts and manufactures of the nation. My inventions at present or lately giving employment to the best part of 1 million people and having added many millions to the national riches. And therefore I have a natural right to rest in my extreme age."
The most phenomenal growth of the Industrial Revolution was undoubtedly in the cotton industry. A new trade in the 18th century, The industry grew spectacularly after 1780, when a series of notable inventions perfected the machine spinning of cotton. The industry's growth can be measured by the import of raw cotton. Average imports increased from £7.5 million per year in 1780 to £37.5 million in 1800, to 100 millions by 1830, to 620 millions by 1850. The number of spindles increased over the same period from less than 2 millions to over 21 millions. Three inventions perfected in the 1780s laid the technical foundations of this expansion. James Hargreaves' spinning jenny, which made possible the simultaneous spinning of many threads at a time to replace the single thread hand spinning wheel. Richard Arkwright's water frame, an improved spinning machine that could be worked by water power. And Samuel Crompton's mule, so called because it was a more efficient hybrid of earlier machines. Of this famous trio of inventors, neither Hargreaves nor Crompton were able to exploit their inventions in successful businesses. Only Arkwright combined both technical and managerial skills in high degree successfully. His decision to go to Cromford in Derbyshire in 1771 and apply water power to machine production of cotton with machinery that was far from perfect was one of the turning points in the history of the factory system. Arkwright built a factory for his new invention and, equally important, created a new type of community, the factory village. Cromford became the prototype industrial community for other great entrepreneurs, like Samuel Gregg, who developed the village of Style in Cheshire, and Saltaire, built by Sir Titus Salt in Yorkshire. Arkwright, the 13th child of a poor family, began his working life as a barber and finished it as a country gentleman. He retired wealthy and famous, Sir Richard Arkwright, knighted for his services to industry. His success was due not only to his inventiveness, but to his enormous vitality and application. A contemporary observer wrote,
Arkwright commonly labored in his multifarious concerns from 5 o'clock in the morning till 9 at night, and when considerably more than 50 years of age, feeling that the defects of his education placed him under great difficulty and inconvenience in conducting his correspondence and the general management of his business, he encroached upon his sleep in order to gain an hour each day to learn English grammar and another to improve his writing and spelling.
Arkwright's fame and fortune rested ultimately, like that of the Derbys, on the production of cheap goods for common consumption. The Industrial Revolution was a consumer revolution, extending and cheapening the range of goods in common use. Not only kitchenware and cottons, but also pottery. In the history of pottery, one name stands supreme, Josiah Wedgwood. He was born in the Staffordshire village of Burslem in 1730, the 12th child of a potter. Before Wedgwood, Staffordshire pottery was primitive, but he made it world famous. Looking back from 1821, George Robertson wrote,
Among all the improvements made in the household furniture and utensils, the greatest about this time was the introduction of a new species of dishes from England, instead of the old clumsy Dutch Delftware and the more ancient pewter plates. In the course of a very few years, it spread over the whole country.
Soon, such pottery was spreading all over the world, as Samuel Smiles wrote.
Instead of importing what we needed for home use from abroad, we became large exporters to other countries, supplying them with earthenware, even in the face of enormous prohibitory duties on articles of British produce. In 1852, not fewer than 84 million pieces of pottery were exported from England, besides what were made for home use.
Wedgwood's first outstanding achievement was to create a new type of pottery that was unusually attractive with its brilliant glaze, was durable with its great tolerance of heat and cold, and was cheap and easy to manufacture. Seeing the possibility of a mass market, Wedgwood organised production in a factory system and was soon selling his pottery in large quantities in London and other growing centres of population. Wedgwood realised that the expansion of his business depended on cheap transportation. The cost of carrying bulk raw materials, mainly clay, and the fragile finished products was greatly reduced by the development of canals, in which Wedgwood was an active promoter. For example, he was a leading supporter of the Grand Trunk Canal, which linked the pottery towns of Staffordshire with the ports of Hull and Liverpool. Wedgwood's genius was probably unique in that he not only provided tableware for the ordinary people of his day, but that examples of his fine pottery now adorn the museums of the world as works of art. Wedgwood was quick to spot that reputation helped sales. For example, in 1765, when he received an order for a tea service from Queen Charlotte, he had once created a new line for the mass market, which was labelled Queensware. Wedgwood was also a scientist, inventing the pyrometer, a thermometer capable of recording extremely high temperatures, in recognition of which he was made a Fellow of the Royal Society in 1783. As businessman, inventor, scientist and artist, he was universally praised. Prime Minister Gladstone's opinion was that Wedgwood
was the greatest man who ever, in any age or country, applied himself to the important work of uniting art with industry.
Wedgwood and his contemporaries are today honoured with a special room in the National Portrait Gallery in London, which celebrates the leaders of the Industrial Revolution. These men differed from their predecessors in the scope of their activities. They were capitalists, providing risk capital for new businesses. They were inventors, engineers and innovators, recognising the possibilities of new sources of power and new machines and prepared to introduce them even before they were proven in production. They were factory managers, recruiting and training labour and monitoring factory production. They were accountants, keeping books and introducing cost accountancy. They were salesmen, judging taste and demand, discovering new markets and recognising the potential of new goods. They combined in themselves all those managerial functions which at a later date were differentiated into specialised and separate professions. They were indeed captains of industry who markedly increased the productivity of the British economy. But where an inventive genius led, it was the host of imitators and followers who gave continuing drive to the Industrial Revolution. The outstanding inventions of the Industrial Revolution, like James Watt's steam engine, are still rightly celebrated as important breakthroughs in technology. But much technical change was not nearly so spectacular, consisting mainly of adjustments and modifications to existing machinery by largely unknown and completely unsung small manufacturers and their artisan employees. For example, the speed at which the cotton loom could operate doubled between 1820 and 1870. The number of spindles on the mule, one of the pioneering cotton spinning machines, increased from 200 to 300 in the 30 years after 1800. We do not know who was responsible for such improvements, but cumulatively they added much to productivity. Occasionally more is known. Edmund Cartwright's power loom, one of the most important of the Industrial Revolution inventions, nevertheless needed much improvement before it was commercially and technologically successful. According to John James, the 19th century historian of the worsted industry, it was a person named Miller of Dumbartonshire, working on a Cartwright machine that had been improved by Dr. Geoffrey of Paisley, who perfected the shuttle action on which all subsequent power looms were constructed.
Such artisans were typical of the Industrial Revolution, and they constituted a new and large urban working class, more ambitious, more self-interested, better informed, and more assertive than their predecessors. Job structure changed as more working people became factory and office employees. The way of life changed as more and more congregated in towns and cities. Factory employment led to extensive division of labor, with a wide range of skills and pay. An expanding economy provided opportunities for self-betterment on an unprecedented scale, and many workers, especially skilled artisans, became successful businessmen. There is no period in English history in which a greater number of poor men have risen to riches and distinction. The Industrial Revolution was the achievement of a new class of businessmen and also a new class of skilled workers. It owed little to the direct actions of government. Rather, it was the result of the uncoordinated and independent actions of men working freely to better their own fortunes. By the time of the Great Exhibition, only 20% of employment in Britain was in agriculture, and nearly half the population lived in towns and cities, a situation which had not existed before in history. There was in England a new civilization, the urban civilization of the modern world. In the next film in this series, we will discuss why the Industrial Revolution occurred in England in the 18th century. We will also show that an increasingly free environment enabled individuals to bring it about, and that the growth of individual rights in the preceding century was crucial to the Industrial Revolution.